In the previous vignettes, we had been describing the Catholic mind, and we mentioned the fact that the Catholic mind must contain all the sacred doctrines of divine revelation. The moment one lacks some of this sacred doctrine, he is bound to get in conflict with those who have the true faith within the Church. We had mentioned some facts in the previous vignettes of what is the wrong side in certain issues that happen in our lives. Everything that happens to us is a test of faith. God sends us all these things in order to test us. It either improves us or makes us worse, depending on how we react to them. It either purifies our heart or makes it dirtier. And so we have to make sure that when these thousands of things come into our life, we know what is the right side, what is God's side, and make the right choices. Otherwise, we fail our test of faith. Another wrong notion that many men today have is the concept of rights. There is no such thing, really, strictly speaking, in the teachings of God. We talk about political rights and social rights and family rights and children's rights. There, strictly speaking, are no such things. What we have are obligation, political obligation, family duties, social duties, duties of children towards their parents. Well, of course, there is what you call rights, really, and this is the right to choose between right and wrong. It is the right either to save your soul or condemn your soul. It is the only right in the eyes of God. And imagine if one day you die and in the afterlife you realize that you have used your rights to ruin your soul. We had mentioned in the past vignette that no one loses his soul or saves his soul with one great extraordinary act. It is always 100 or 1,000 little acts, and we taking the right side, taking God's side, that causes the salvation of our souls. It is the way that we pass our tests and become worthy of God's reward. Now, notice something that everybody is doing today, which they were also doing in the Old and the New Testament, but seems to be a way to lose our souls. Addressed to the young man, it says, "Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. Let your heart cheer you in your youth, and follow the desires of your heart." Sounds okay, isn't it? But know that for all these things, God will bring you unto judgment. Many Catholics today feel that they have the right to choose their own religion. They go out and say, "I have a right to make up my mind, to choose my faith and to choose my sect or my religion." Yes, of course, you have a right to choose any religion. But keep in mind, there is only one true religion. The others are false. Such mentality is very similar to the mentalities we had mentioned before. This demanding for one's right, it is a very grave error. In fact, this idea of doing your own will, insisting on your right by doing your own will, is called the eternal heresy. It was the first heresy, and it is still the same heresy that is being committed today. In fact, it is often called as the devil's pattern. Every day, as God sends us these thousands of little things to test our faith, keep in mind that daily you walk towards God's mercy or towards God's wrath. We cannot judge others, and we cannot be sure of ourselves. But we can, in some limited degree, find out if we are pleasing to God and going towards His direction. Now, notice what I said. We can never be sure of ourselves until we are actually dying and receiving the assurance from God that He is very pleased with us. And therefore, when we hear Christians so certain that they are saved, makes us wonder whether they have their thinking right, if they are thinking in accordance to divine revelation. Know therefore for certain that every day the good and the bad are being separated silently but surely, and it is going on every day. Know also that everything that comes to you is a test of faith, and you have to make the right answer, and therefore you must be certain you know which is the right answer and the wrong answer, what will bring us to God and away from God. The Catholic mind should also know for certain that there are things which are right and things which are wrong. And it's our conscience that will help us decide which is right and wrong. And when you discover what is right, you must fight for it. And we should also know that if we see our neighbor doing something which we think is wrong, by our lives we should witness and correct the wrong that our neighbors are committing. Otherwise, we partake of his sins. How do we partake of the sins of our neighbors? It is when you see them committing something that you know very well is wrong, and you do nothing about it. Conscience usually tells you that he has done something wrong. It should surprise you, it should shock you, and you should react within yourself and do really something about it. You have seen your neighbor waylaid by thieves, and you're like the priest who just passed by without doing anything. You have seen your neighbor in prison by sin, and you do nothing, not even visit him. So you see, by your silence, you are actually telling him, oh, that's all right, and it should confirm him more in his sinfulness. Let us do what is right. That's the Catholic mind. Let us do what is right not because our reason says so, not because our feelings say that it is right. Let us do right because God said so in divine revelation. But before God reveals to us what is right, we must have a pure heart and a fear of God. It is by developing a pure heart that we see God. And it is only when we see God that God reveals His teachings to us. Divine revelation, therefore, is what we call sacred doctrine. It is what God taught us teachings which can be attained by natural reasoning, but it also contains those things which natural reason cannot attain by itself. Divine revelation contains the teachings in which God wants us to love Him. He doesn't want it less or more, just exactly the way He taught us to love Him. But before we can discover the contents of this divine revelation, we must first develop humility and meekness. But even this is part of divine revelation, because the humility required of us is not human humility, but divine humility. The meekness required of us is not human, but also divine meekness. Revelation or sacred doctrine contains teachings of God, step by step, on how we can grow from the beginnings of love to the perfection of charity. Oftentimes it's called divine revelation. Sometimes it is called sacred doctrine. In the New Testament, it is often referred to as the commandments of Christ. The Catholic mind, therefore, is this, that in all things we are guided by the commandments of Christ. And the moment we do this, we shall possess a keen faith, a devotion, and a religiosity that need no arguments. God bless you.